Hello, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Oh, super.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Nice to see you again. So I guess we'll dive right into it. The future of media literally could be a topic that goes in an infinite number of directions. But I think for this conversation, let's drill down into some areas that are significantly impacting the industry today, and try to figure out where they go from here. And as we roll through these, I'll keep an eye on the Q&A,
hmm
so that we can introduce some questions that I know people will have for you. Um,
Sure.
Great. So the first topic, which I know is something you're acutely aware of and interested in, is maybe hearkening back to the past of media, because it's something the industry's discussed at length, not that long ago. But the idea of shifting your mindset as somebody who invests in media on behalf of a let's say significant player in the space is shifting that mindset from paid to owned. Uh,
hmm
the social landscape's expanded and diversified recently. It'll likely continue to do so. But that's a concept that last arose as Facebook, YouTube, Instagram reached critical mass and commanded a lion's share of the audience's time and attention. As these new platforms, emerged, and the adoption curve was incredibly steep, and now they engage consumers, and particularly younger and the youngest consumers, at massive scale. How are you thinking about developing your relationships with those audiences and those platforms?
hmm I mean, these platforms and audiences are here to stay, and they are important, and they're going to get bigger. And they give us an opportunity to leverage, some of the most, personalized experiences. And as brand marketers, they offer some of the best ways of leveraging personalized experiences, getting the scale and reach that most marketers, crave for. And these kind of media, they enable like richer interactions and improve targeting. So they encourage customers to share things which make them happy. And these platforms have evolved so much. I mean, they are not just like a posting machine. I mean, these days they are enabling social commerce and live streaming. I mean, who would imagine? I mean, 4 years ago, in 2018, Nike sold their first Air Jordan on Snapchat, if you recall that, exactly 4 years ago in the month of February, right? And
Yeah.
it sold out in 23 minutes. So that was the beginning of that, shoppable commerce. And since then, we have seen, Pinterest has come out with shoppable pins. I mean, TikTok, I mean, you can blame TikTok for, empty aisles, baking aisles, or, some of the, beauty aisles, they are empty with the products. So I think, these platforms have a serious clout, and they are giving, brands to have that conversation directly, that one-to-one, truly personalized, which we had always craved for. And you were talking about, the shift from the mindset. I think as marketers, we are always focusing on, paid, earned, owned, and shared media. And, we have to find a strike balance on, how we will be shifting our ad dollars through all these, four different, I would say, channels, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot to unpack there, because the benefits of these platforms for marketers such as yourself are so innumerable, right? You mentioned everything from, understanding a consumer's particular likes and maybe dislikes, to being able to develop a one-to-one relationship that draws upon that understanding, to commerce, to just sheer scale. It would seem like a platform, and let's use TikTok as an example, is a place that can do so many different things, kind of in one place, that you would previously have had to go to a bunch of different media types to satisfy, right? And I've got to imagine that's appealing. That sort of consolidation, in a sense, is that a trend that you are benefiting from now, and that you are going to look to continue to capitalize on going forward?
Absolutely. I think you're spot on, that's how it's going to shape up. And you may see, new media avenues may emerge, Like, Clubhouse, we spoke about it during our preparation. I mean, does anybody speak about Clubhouse now? I mean, last year was such a rage, and hey, if you didn't get the invite, you're missing on something. So I had to, kind of, ask Brian, hey, can I get an invite, right? So you will always see these emerging channels come. I mean, 5 years ago, we did not even know what TikTok was, right? So it has really come up. And last year, I mean, TikTok literally dethroned, Google as a, search engine. So they had more searches, come compared to Google. So we will see these, shifts happening, Sam.
Do you feel like the industry or the marketers generally are more prepared for the rapid emergence of new platforms than maybe they were kind of in the early days of social media? Is that something you're kind of always on your toes and looking out for at this point?
I mean, yes, definitely. We are always looking for, any new emerging channels because see, I mean, brands follow where the eyeballs are or where the audiences are. That's rule number one of advertising, right? So if you are seeing, and if it's relevant for your brand, definitely, you make a presence and you are able to create experiences that's relevant for the brand and for the consumers.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it just seems like marketers were so much faster to figuring out how to effectively utilize something like TikTok or Snapchat than maybe the earliest days of social media. And I think as an industry, we thought not that long ago that the dominant players in the space couldn't be unthroned. Not that they've been, dethroned exactly, but there is apparently room for emerging competitors. And it'll be interesting to see, given we're talking about the future of media, what the platforms, whoever's having this conversation next year will be talking about, and in the years beyond that. One thing, impacting, I think, the ability to connect with consumers on a massive scale and provide the sort of, extremely rich and engaging experiences that we're talking about is 5G, right? And you're from Verizon, and this isn't meant to be self-serving because I know 5G is something you guys talk about a little bit in market these days.
Yeah.
But it certainly is a part of the future of media, right? Lower latency, higher bandwidth. Those are things that are going to enable deeper content experiences and make, even the most immersive experiences extremely portable. You're a big part of the conversation, but do you have expectations in terms of how 5G will impact media creation, media distribution, and advertising specifically? Like what will it enable you to do to engage audiences digitally?
Yeah, sure. I mean, before I start talking about 5G, let me just share with the audiences that Apple announced last year that any new phones coming out this year in 2022, they will not introduce any 4G only models. So that's key. So let that sink in. That's a very important milestone for both brands, advertisers, and the whole ecosystem of digital advertising. So now, coming back to 5G. So, I mean, this is kind of like a moment for us, and ad industry is beginning to adopt, 5G to power new types of ad experiences. And, as, more devices gets into the hand of people, we will see, experiences like, AR ad units, VR ad units that'll come into play. And I think you touched upon, the latency and, the velocity at which the content can be delivered. So again, the future of advertising is immersive. And we all know that user level targeting, as we know, has forever changed. The deprecation of the ad IDs and cookies has significantly reduced the number of that one-to-one addressable devices and limited our traditional approaches to targeting. So having said that, we need new ways to connect with the customers. And then, before 5G came into existence, we always believed that a typical website would take, like 2 seconds, up to 4 seconds to download. But now, with 5G, which is 10 times more faster than 4G. And then we used to think about that, okay, that 20 milliseconds is the threshold, but now, with 5G, you can deliver content under 2 milliseconds. Now think about that. That is game-changing experience to create those immersive experiences for the brands. And under 2 milliseconds, and you are able to create content which is delivered almost instantaneously. I think that's what is going to change. It's going to change the whole ecosystem of advertising. And that immersive experiences would be the crux of the new advertising medium. And then we always say, hey, better ads leads to higher engagement, right? So if we are showing customers ads which they like, we will see your click-through rates go up, right? And we have done certain tests, and we have seen with our partners that the click-through rates could jump up till 2 to 3 times. And guess what? If your click-through rate jumps, your return on ad spending jumps, right? So it's a win-win situation for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And we might be talking about the future of media, but we're still talking about click-through rates. That'll never go away. Thanks for confirming that is in fact part of the future of media. I do think, to your point, that everyone will benefit. That's not to say that 5G, as a technology, it's going to put pressure on the industry, right? From a publisher side, where I come from, I think there's going to be consumer pressure to deliver richer and more engaging experiences, and that companies like Vox will have to sort of figure out how to make the best use of that technology and how to satisfy the consumer demand that it's going to create, because people aren't going to be satisfied with, a relatively flat page that loads really fast, right? They're going to want us to take advantage of all of the things we can do with that bandwidth and that low latency. I think your point about the impact it's going to have on advertising and really on creative experiences will put pressure on the industry too. Have you started to talk to creative agencies or had discussions internally about how best to leverage the capabilities that 5G will unlock for, a banner advertisement, really, right? Which will essentially become a portal to do what you want almost.
I mean, think like a banner ad. It could become your, audio streaming ad, where you can have multiple, audio streaming come into, place. And with that 5G speed, you're able to deliver content from 20, 30 different providers, instantly, right? That's one example. Another thing you could also use, instead of using like static images, you can do like 360-degree views of your product or your surroundings. And we've always seen, how you can change your existing environment into a metaverse or a 3D kind of environment also. So yes, I mean, there are different applications. It's just, gaming, of course, is one. Events, would definitely, see a whole different landscape, especially with our, 5G activations during Super Bowl. We did some remarkable experiences for our customers just, few days ago in LA.
Yeah, well, if there's one marketer that should be ready for this, it's you guys. I think, you're talking about experiences that we've tried to bring to consumers through advertising in the past, but that haven't been reliably scalable as good consumer experiences, right? They've been, at times really cool, but also frustrating for the user. So it'll be interesting to see how we can scale some of those approaches and technologies. You mentioned gaming. Gaming is, I think, one of the most obvious and easily understandable benefits of a 5G world. But not that long ago, gaming was considered kind of outside of the mainstream in terms of media or the broader entertainment landscape. It's not even debatable that it's now fully a part of that ecosystem, right? So like music, like movies, games are streamed. And in terms of IP, gaming is virtually every popular film franchise or streaming show has a gaming extension or vice versa. It's not sort of, out there in a corner or on an island anymore. Stealing share from traditional media of all types, and it's an increasingly important place for marketers to be. As we look kind of ahead into the future, do you see gaming as a distinct kind of core channel for your brand as a way to connect with consumers? Is that high on your radar?
No, absolutely. I mean, gaming is a core channel. I mean, for us, and I think, a lot of brands, they are dabbling their hands into the gaming space. But, one thing I want to point out is that, console-based gaming is fine, but what we will be seeing with 5G is your cloud-based gaming, that is really going to grow by leaps and bounds. And with, again, faster speed, 10 times more faster than your 4G, these cloud-based, gaming models, that's really going to, pick up. And just, I think some projections we have got is that, this cloud-based gaming, the revenues could easily touch, I think, around $10 billion by 2025. So that's going to be pretty substantial on the cloud gaming side. But, with 5G, you have super connectivity, and then instead of relying on your slower phones and slower speeds, you're able to instantly connect. Think about like a multi-game experience, right? You're playing with your friends. You are not the one who needs to suffer with a poor connectivity, right? Or let's say you're storming a castle with your friends together. You are not the one who's lagged behind just because you had a poor connectivity, right? But when everybody is on that 5G network, think about that. I mean, that gaming experience would be incredibly better, for the gamers. And metaverse, I mean, that's the next evolution. I mean, if we talk about gaming, how can we not talk about metaverse,
Yeah,
right?
inevitable.
So, I mean, we all know Roblox, Fortnite. I mean, that's central. Every household, if you have kids, your kids are playing into it. They're spending, 4 or 5 hours, every day. And there are, again, some of other metaverse like, Decentraland, Upland, Sandbox, and I think Victoria VR was also launched last year. So all these, virtual worlds, I mean, they are really generating, serious money. So, I mean, I always say, like, forget, D2C, direct to consumer, it's going to be direct to avatar, D2A. So, we'll be marketing to your digital version of who you are in those virtual spaces. So many brands have already, done successful product placements. I think last year, Gucci, I mean, they sold their purse more than what it sells in the retail, real physical store environment.
Yeah, and
That's something you would never
higher
imagine,
too.
right?
Yeah, no, it's almost unfathomable. And to go back to this, I think when we're having this conversation again in a year or two, it'll be kind of old hat almost, right? It seems like the consumer adoption of some of these technologies and concepts is really, really fast. You mentioned Fortnite as kind of a metaverse-like experience. That's a place that has become a kind of proven environment for brands to come in and connect with consumers successfully. But there are examples of those types of environments being sort of fraught for brands. Do you think about sort of, are you extremely cautious about how your brand shows up in digital environments like that, knowing that you're reaching an audience of people who are fully immersed and have a relationship with whatever platform they're engaging with? It just seems like there needs to be an extra level of sensitivity in order to take full advantage of them.
I mean, yeah, of course, you're following your brand guidelines, your overarching brand guidelines, brand principles, which you follow what you're following in your real world, they don't change. But, this is such a new space. I mean, this is a space where you can experiment, learn, it's like an open canvas. You can paint any way you want it. And this is giving marketers an opportunity, to try, risk, and, get some learnings. And I think, previous session, we were talking about reaching Gen Z. So I think, if your audience is, Gen Z, this is a right medium to experiment. And we have seen so many brands experiment, like Hyundai, for example, they launched their, hydrogen fuel cell powered cars into Roblox, and there's INEQ. So again, you're introducing your cool concept cars to these young generations, hoping that, as they mature, they would become loyal brand buyers, from you. And I think McDonald's just recently filed, I think like probably 8 or 10 trademarks. So they will be setting up their, virtual McDonald's stores, which will be delivering virtual food. I mean, who would imagine that, Sam?
Yeah, not me. But yeah, and I think it's interesting to see whether or not that idea of virtual food delivery is it having a moment now as sort of a stunt, or is that something that people are actually going to look for in the future? And I guess, despite this being the future of media, I don't think it's something we know the answer to.
Yep, and it's always very simple. We always follow, where people go, right? So whether it's a metaverse or a crowded street or a commercial break, I mean, the rules for business, seeking to stand out, they remain the same, right? Number one, stand out. Creativity is defining definitely the competitive advantage, and the possibilities for creativity are so vast. There are no rules, there are no laws, right? Nothing applies. I mean, it's like no laws of physics apply here. In short, anything is possible.
Yeah, I think that's a great. Some of the editors of The Verge were talking about this sort of, I guess, video that resurfaced a few weeks ago when kind of the metaverse talk was really heating up culturally, and it was something that Walmart had published years ago. That was forward looking, and it was essentially demonstrating a metaverse like sort of digital shopping experience. And it was showing an avatar essentially walking through a digital representation of a Walmart. And it was getting panned on Twitter and other places, right? As for the reason that, like, that's not a consumer experience that people necessarily want. And to your point, when you're in that space, there aren't rules. You shouldn't just be, purely recreating an IRL experience in a digital space, because you don't have to. And I think, in talking with those Verge editors, their point was that, exactly what you just said, which is you've got to follow the consumer's lead, and develop experiences for them that actually take full advantage of the format, as opposed to just trying to recreate things. It'll be really interesting to watch brands figure that out over the next few years.
Absolutely. So what's your digital avatar, Sam? Who's your digital Sam?
I'm not ready to go wide with that yet. I'll figure it out. I'm definitely the guy who's lagging behind and storming the castle, no matter how good my connection is. So I've got a little work to do. So another topic that has been a part of the conversation in the past of media, but I think is poised to change significantly in the future, is brand safety and fraud. So if the past is any indication, this whole world isn't getting any less complex. The sort of advertising ecosystem in the digital space is crowded. There's very little transparency. Verizon as a brand has taken a strong stance against ad fraud, toward brand safety, supply chain hygiene. Do you see this getting simpler, easier in the future? Or are you going to have a better sense of exactly where your dollars and impressions are going? What is your kind of take on that as we look ahead?
Well, personally, my opinion, it's going to get worse. We have always been asking for that transparency for so many years now. And I mean, in fact, eMarketer did a survey last year, and they asked, so they listed some of the priorities. So the transparency was number one, followed by ad fraud. Like 67% of media buyers demand transparency, followed by, the ad fraud. So unless we get that transparency, it's going to be very, very difficult. Talk about like IVTs or, whatever that number is, is it 5%, 10%? Oh, is, my fraud capture rate better than yours? I mean, are you really able to identify, how much of, fraud you are generating? So I think these are some of the questions, which industry has to, answer and, stand up. Who do we blame on? I mean, is it the supply side, DSPs, SSPs, or, publishers, right? Or the system is so complex. I mean, the ad tech is built in, I don't know, it's like very long, complex, opaque supply chains. There is no transparency at all. Even the folks in ad tech don't understand how it works. I mean, that is like, I've had conversations, and honestly, they would say, we don't get it. It just works. Again, you get slapped with a, let's say, agency fee of 20% or 30%. Where is that agency fees going? How many middlemen are there? How it is getting sliced and diced? Facebook doesn't take the whole thing. Ad exchange doesn't take the whole thing. How is that money getting split? We have literally no transparency. And because there is no transparency, leads to scams and fraud. And again, ANA kind of puts the fraud around, $7 to $8 billion. But, Juniper Research, they put the fraud at much higher number, which is roughly, will be touching almost $40 billion, by the end of this year. So it's a big problem we have. And, we have seen the rise of, mobile ad networks. And that has led to, more fraud, from device hijacking to, fake downloads, to IDK spoofing. So this problem, I mean, it's going to grow as time passes, because there is a shift happening from traditional, to digital, and now from digital to mobile. And mobile ad networks are actually, more susceptible. And now we have the over the top, think about that, the CTV, right? I think Pixelate ran a study and they found that 1/4 of the ads are shown when the TVs were turned off. So I mean, who's to blame now? I mean, right?
Yeah.
That's just one part of the problem. And you will see, like, as new inventory format or types come up, like the native audio. So these fraudsters, they're going to follow, and they're going to follow where the eyeballs are and where the money goes, right? Right now, the money is moving into the mobile ad networks. I mean, your traditional video, that is the biggest, I would say, susceptible to fraud, because for videos, we need impressions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these fraudsters want to give you, they're going to harvest impressions, they're going to share that with you, right? So I think that's a big problem, which we have to consider and address. Overall, your IVT rates or the fraud rates across a full media buy, may look smaller, but I always urge, brand folks to really, dig deep and go closer and see, what pockets of fraud, where is it going? These are sophisticated fraudsters, they're moving away from the stuff where it is hard and where they can't make money anymore. They will find pockets of your app or your site, and they will do the dirty job.
Wow, not what I was hoping you would say. You could have just said, no, it'll go away soon. But no, you're right. I mean, the extent of the problem is something I think we're just starting to understand, and that'll be the first step in really trying to eradicate this.
It's going to be hard. And again, I always kind of, point out like 3 things you have to keep a note, Sam. One is your, flag rate, then you have the detection rate and the accuracy. So by detection rate, I mean the percentage of fraud that a vendor will report to you in their ad specs, right? It could be 5%, 8%, whatever, 10%, right? That doesn't mean that all the inventory that was flagged as fraud is actually fraud, right? So now comes the second concept, which is accuracy. So what we have now is just a flag rate war going on, right? Publisher X will come say, my flag rate is higher than yours. Well, so I'm catching more fraud, right? Is that really true, right? You cannot tell because you don't know whether all that inventory is actually correctly identified as fraud.
Yeah.
Right, Sam? I mean, so we have a lot of challenges, so the fraud is not going away. Just to be honest and candid, it's going to get worse. Yeah.
Yeah, the OTT thing, frankly, isn't even something that I'd considered, but that's a pretty staggering number in a environment that I guess is right for new fraudsters. So something to certainly keep an eye on. I want to bring a question in from the chat about media mix and how you determine at what point it's the right time to invest in a technology or a space that's starting to hit critical mass. Gaming or Web3 is the example in the question. How do you determine when that space is ripe for investment?
So you start small. If you see any space which is heating up, the best example is Clubhouse. Clubhouse did not even have an ad model to start with, right? They were like slowly deciding, and then they came up with something. So if you see, your brand makes a fit in that space, and that's where your audiences are. You start small, you test, you see the lift. Is it really making sense? And then if it justifies, and you're getting a very high return on ad spend, and then where you, scale your investments up. So my recommendation is start small and then go big.
And if this is sort of the second part of the question, if the val prop of that space, and again, sort of Web3 being the example, is building long-term community or a relationship with a group of people over time, would a test and sort of, dipping your toe into the space give you an accurate read on whether or not that's viable there, if you have sort of a long-term goal in a space? Because it does seem like some of the new spaces are meant for relationship development, and that you can then tack on commerce and a bunch of other things to that. Do you test there, or do you have to test fairly aggressively? And if it's the latter, how do you get the confidence to do that in one of these new spaces?
Yeah, I mean, I think you answered your own question.
Oh.
So yes, yes, you get the sense of how it's performing, and then you scale up your investment over a period of time. But again, you need to find, are your audience really hanging out in that space? That's the key.
Yeah.
It's not just because, hey, TikTok, Charlie D'Amelio partnered with Dunkin', she's their brand ambassador, doesn't mean that, she can do wonders for your brand, right?
Yeah.
So you have to be just, very specific. What is your overall, brand philosophy, your overall arching goals and objectives, and, stick to your brand DNA.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I can tell you as somebody who's been in, on the sales side of the digital space for almost a couple of decades at this point, we don't see as many test budgets for what we now consider traditional tactics as we used to. But that used to be kind of a bread and butter thing, right? Of let's try this and see if it works. I think there's now a better understanding of what the return on ad spend will be for a typical digital investment. And I'm sure we'll get to that place with these new technologies as well. And I think let's move on to another thing that was certainly discussed in the previous session, but that I know is something that you've taken note of too, and that's the rise of retail media networks. We talked earlier this week about cookie deprecation, and you mentioned retailers as a group that has really vast caches of first-party data because they have one-to-one relationships with their customers, and it's a growing force in the space. You pointed out Amazon as kind of the biggest and most obvious example, but Walmart with Walmart Connect and Target with Roundel, there are others who are significantly expanding their capabilities. What does the future hold for that space? What's the unique value now, and where do you think it's going?
Yeah, I mean, it's growing by leaps and bounds. I mean, last 2 years, I've seen 30-40% jump in revenues in the retail media space. And we have seen so many new players come into this space. And as you said earlier, with that third-party cookies on the way out and the privacy regulations, coming in, I think now it's the time for retailers to take advantage of their first-party data, brand recognition, and the customer relationships, they have to attract, whether it's, CPG brand dollars, or for example, Best Buy, they have the opportunity to attract in a very niche segment. And we have seen, I mean, so many brands have come up with their own retail media networks. I mean, Dollar Tree, I mean, who would imagine Dollar Tree would come up with their own retail media network, right? And you have, of course, Walgreens is there. You mentioned, Target, Kroger, that's another one. You got Best Buy, Home Depot. Home Depot has their own retail media network now. But the challenge is that even these retailers, their network, small networks, and they would offer up their, tens and millions of their members, right? Part of their loyalty platform. They would never be able to match the scale of the Google, the Facebook, and the Amazon, right? So there's a question for ad buyers. I mean, do you have an appetite to plug into amounts yet another walled garden? I mean, that's something we have to think about, right? So you're moving from walled garden, which is the giant, 3 of them, right? And then they'll have so many small walled gardens, Dollar Tree, and you have, Best Buy, and then Home Depot, right? Which would be, little in their own tiny little space. They are very, I would say, niche audiences. So if your segments are targeting those, definitely that would be, something, you could definitely look at. And of course, I think, since, all these retail media networks have a strong loyalty databases you can leverage. And I'm pretty sure, they would be reporting all, complete full funnel reporting with, clicks and If you're doing coupons, it will be coupon clip rates, right? Overall sales, ROI, and of course, the entire, attribution modeling. So, I mean, this space will grow, Sam. It's continue to grow, and we're going to find out is that, there will be a lot of competition driving this retail media innovation. Because now it's so easy. There are so many third-party providers which will, plug and play. And hey, if you have more than 500 locations, you can start up your own retail media network in, less than a week, right?
Yeah.
So with all these third parties, it's going to become much, much easier. And then I think retailers are getting better at this digital advertising game. They have learned, and now there is not a very steep learning curve. We have partners which will come in and they set up the entire system for you. And one more thing I think we need to definitely talk about is the new kind of partnerships, which have come up. Traditionally, they always did like your search ads, right? You search and you do the ad. But now I think, you will see different types of ads, which could be, display and video ads. Like this year, Walmart, they I think had a partnership with Trade Desk, right? So they would be offering like more connected TV types of advertising through demand side platform partnerships. And then, you have the Kroger and the Roku on the content platforms. So you will see, aggressively, moving into new different types of media formats like CTV for the retail side. So I think that's something, we'll watch closely. Yeah. This year.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I hadn't, I think the biggest examples are the ones that come to mind first, but to your point that the world of retail is so vast and it can exist in so many different sort of niche spaces. Home Depot is a really great example of somebody who has an incredible amount of data and really strong relationships with a specific type of consumer that could be of value to someone. I could see that landscape or ecosystem quickly becoming overwhelming though for somebody like Verizon who wants to talk to everybody, more or less, right? So it'll be a lot to navigate, but I think you're absolutely right that it's just going to continue to expand. A question in the chat, if we've got time for this, Paul, is it, and I'll read it verbatim, but it says Verizon has some very specific ESG goals. Will Verizon be activating media dollars against these initiatives to engage consumers in those efforts?
Well, hey, Sam, I think we're just about at time.
Oh, okay. Well,
might have to save that one, Abhi.
We'll follow up on that next year.
But I will second your last point around data sharing and collaboration and how, I know our AWS customers are leaning in on their first party data and how to enhance that data, and in many cases, how to monetize it. And even at Amazon and AWS, we actually have an Amazon Marketing Cloud, which is a clean room for advertising insights that we make available to our customers. So just dittoing your sentiments there, Abhi.
Thank you.